My name is Dan Mitchell. I'm a senior fellow at the Cato Institute, and I'm here to narrate this video from the Center for Freedom and Prosperity. Today's fun lesson is about tax competition. More specifically, I want to explain why tax competition is a liberalizing force in the world economy and why politicians from high-tax nations like France should not be allowed to undermine competition in order to prop up their inefficient welfare states. Most important of all, I want every taxpayer to realize why it's important to defend tax competition from statists who want to create an OPEC for politicians. But first, let's spend a few seconds getting our definitions straight. Tax competition exists when politicians feel pressure to lower tax rates because they are concerned that jobs and investment may cross borders, a process that has become much easier in recent decades because of globalization. In other words, tax competition exists when governments compete with each other. The economic analysis of this process is very straightforward. Monopolies are bad, competition is good. That's so simple even a politician should grasp the concept. Consumers benefit when banks compete for their business, they benefit when grocery stores compete for their business, and they benefit when pet stores compete for their business. Likewise, taxpayers benefit when governments compete. Let's use an analogy. Imagine a town with just one gas station. That one gas station could charge high prices, maintain inconvenient hours, and offer shoddy service. But what if there are 5 stations in that town? Consumers, then, are free to choose. And this means gas stations will compete to offer the best product at the best price with the best service. The same process exists with governments. In the absence of any constraints, politicians will continuously raise tax rates because it's in their self-interest to have bigger, more intrusive government. Heck, that's one of the main reasons why governments became so bloated and taxes became so onerous in the 1960s and 1970s. Fortunately, 2 leaders changed world history. Margaret Thatcher rescued the United Kingdom economy by slashing the top tax rate from 83% down to 40%. Ronald Reagan restored the U.S. economy by cutting the top rate from 70% to 28%. But what's really interesting about the Thatcher and Reagan tax cuts is that nations all over the world have been forced to play follow the leader, thanks in part to globalization. As the chart illustrates, top tax rates in the industrialized world have dropped from more than 65% down to about 40%. This is a dramatic shift toward better tax policy, and it explains, at least in part, why the global economy is much stronger today than it was in the 1970s. But the key thing to realize is that politicians in other nations only cut their tax rates because of competitive pressure. There's never been a leader like Thatcher or Reagan in statist countries like France or Germany. Heck, their supposed right-wing politicians are to the left of American Democrats. And their left-wing politicians, the ones that usually hold power, they're out-of-the-closet socialists. But notwithstanding their statist ideology, European politicians have been cutting tax rates. This is why tax competition is such an important force for good policy. Even bad lawmakers are compelled to do the right thing when they fear the geese that laid the golden eggs will fly across the border. And it's not just the personal tax rate. Corporate tax rates have dropped by more than 20 percentage points since Thatcher and Reagan took office, though Ireland really deserves the lion's share of the credit. By slashing the corporate rate from 50% to 12.5%, Irish leaders turned their economy from the sick man of Europe into the Celtic tiger. But the global effect is even bigger. In order to compete with Ireland, nations all over Europe and around the globe are racing to lower their corporate tax rates. Well, tax competition is also playing a role in the global flat tax revolution. 20 years ago, Hong Kong was the only recognizable flat tax jurisdiction. Today, there are nearly 24 flat tax jurisdictions, including Russia, Slovakia, Iceland, and Estonia. Now, I wish I could say this is because politicians are reading my tax reform studies, but the real reason is tax competition. Now for the bad news. Not surprisingly, politicians from high-tax nations don't like tax competition. They resent being forced to lower tax rates. Much like the owner of a town's only gas station, they want captive customers who have no choices. These politicians are trying to undermine tax competition. Working through the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, an international bureaucracy based in Paris, they want to hinder the flow of jobs and investment from high-tax nations to low-tax nations. The OECD even has a so-called harmful tax competition project. It put together a blacklist of low-tax jurisdictions, and it threatened them with financial protectionism if they didn't help high-tax nations enforce their bad tax laws. You may think this is so crazy that I must be making it up. But let's see what the OECD has to say. In its 2000 report, it said that low or no taxes is the #1 reason for blacklisting countries. The OECD also complained that low tax policies unfairly erode the tax bases of other countries. And it said that tax competition is reshaping the desired level and mix of taxes and public spending. Last but not least, the OECD even admitted it doesn't like tax competition because it may hamper the application of progressive tax rates and the achievement of redistributive goals. In other words, the OECD thinks low-tax nations should be forced to surrender their sovereignty to help high-tax nations like France and Germany prop up their inefficient welfare states. The OECD's anti-tax competition project is bad tax policy, and it's also a threat to America. According to the OECD's definition, the United States is a tax haven. Indeed, the bureaucrats in Paris could have put America on their blacklist. Now, I'm no big fan of the tax laws adopted by Congress, but I'd much rather they screw up our tax system than let a bunch of European socialists strip away our fiscal sovereignty and make things even worse. Do you realize that America would never be able to adopt a flat tax or a national sales tax if we allowed the OECD to dictate global tax rules? To add insult to injury, OECD bureaucrats get tax-free salaries, yet they go around the world threatening to punish nations with low taxes. But the real outrage is that American tax dollars are subsidizing the OECD's anti-tax competition scheme. The United States pays 1/4 of the budget for the Paris-based bureaucracy. We even pay the biggest share for the OECD's wine cellar. Let's wrap this up. The French and the Germans should have the right to adopt bad tax policy, but they should be prepared to deal with the consequences, including a shift of jobs and investment to places like Ireland, Hong Kong, and America. Under no circumstances should they be allowed to create a global tax cartel to hinder the competitive position of nations with better tax law. This is why the OECD's anti-tax competition project is a threat to economic freedom. I appreciate your spending so much time learning about this important issue. Please help the Center for Freedom and Prosperity defend tax competition. Circulate this video to your friends and colleagues. We need to educate American politicians about this threat so they stop subsidizing international bureaucracies like the OECD that pursue anti-American policies. As Thomas Jefferson said, eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. I'm Dan Mitchell. Thank you for listening.